Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /PettyRevenge, where people get little wins on others, and the stories are so satisfying. And in this episode, HOA Karens are messing with the wrong people and getting exactly what they deserve. So yeah, if you've ever had to deal with a nasty neighbor or an HOA Karen, you'll love this lineup. So sit back, relax, and seriously, try not to shake your heads too hard at these stories. So this happened about 10 years ago. My house is the first house in the neighborhood. I'm on the corner. The street on the side of my home is the HOA neighborhood, but my front yard is on a different street that's not part of the HOA. When I moved in, I asked them if I could pay their HOA fees to let my kids use the pool and playground across the street, and they said no. Not long after, I planted a mulberry tree on the corner of my property, and I started getting visits from their HOA saying that my branches were too low to the ground and it violated their HOA policies. I told them if I was in the HOA, you'd see my kids swimming in the pool. Since they didn't, they would have to deal with my tree. My kids love that tree, and they still come in the spring to gather berries, even though they're now in their 20s. One day, I come home and I see that someone's lopped off a big branch from the tree, one that went out to the street. I tried to find out who did it, but they kept quiet about it, and there wasn't anyone I could go after. So cue the petty revenge. I rebuilt the branch using PVC, and I wrapped it in bright Christmas lights. At this point in time, it was May. Then, I wrapped the rest of the tree for good measure. And the thing is, I did it ugly too. It was propped up with old branches I found in the woods and some rope, and it looked really awful. I kept those lights on all the way until just before Christmas when I took them down. They did send me some letters, but they just went into the trash. The HOA members who came to my house to tell me to take it down, since it was the gateway to their neighborhood and that I was affecting their property values, were told to F off. They never did mess with the lights though. I guess they were worried about what I'd pull next. Seriously, the things that some people come up with to get back at others. Like, I bet the HOA regretted cutting that branch down big time when they saw that PVC monstrosity go up. And this person comments, I know of someone in a similar situation. House on a corner, not part of the HOA. The first time they tried to mess with him, he placed an old white toilet at the edge of his property, and he planted a fake flower in it. And in this next post, a nasty neighbor uses HOA rules against OP, and it backfires big time. So this happened a couple of years ago, but I finally decided to post it. I'll give the relevant origin story for the villain, who I'll call Scumbag Steve. Roughly 6 years ago, my wife and I decided to move. Long story short, we couldn't find any pre-existing houses that we really liked, but we did find the neighborhood where we currently live, and we built a house with a developer. As people do, we drove by every so often to look at the progress they were making on the house. One night, we stopped and we went out to look at the hole in the ground as they had just gotten ready to pour the concrete for the basement walls. And here comes Scumbag Steve, acting like a concerned neighbor and yelling at us because, quote, materials have been getting stolen. We explained that we would be the new neighbors and had a brief conversation where he commented that he and another neighbor are the unofficial neighborhood watch. Missed that red flag at the moment, but we left feeling warm and fuzzy because the neighbors looked after each other. Unbeknownst to us, Scumbag Steve is really just an overactive, nosy Nelly, and he's always looking for ways to screw with people. A bit of foreshadowing now. Some things he's done to other neighbors are letting his dog poop and pee wherever she wants without cleaning it up. He would also look through neighbors' trash cans, asking about neighbors' doorbell cameras, how far it can pick stuff up, all that stuff. I know I'm being a bit nitpicky here, but it tracks for him. We also found out later that he's a drunk, and the guy would proudly proclaim and brag about how he beat his DUI that he got after a heated argument with his wife. He's also a scavenger/scrapper, so who's really stealing those materials, Steve? One day, I decided that I want to start being a little more self-sufficient, and I picked up some chickens to raise for eggs. Now, I'm really not that guy that wants to be annoying to my neighbors, but even then, the area we live in is surrounded by farms and is farm-themed. I did my due diligence and I checked town ordinances and the HOA guidelines we were given, and I found no rules or ordinances against having chickens/poultry on your property. Backtracking slightly, when we signed our contract and went to settlement, we only received a one-page flyer that went over some basic items restricted by the HOA. No grilling in the front yard, no basketball hoops in the street, no boats, RVs on a permanent basis, stuff like that. There was no mention of anything about the types of animals you can or can't have. So working on the idea that I'm in the clear, I buy some chicks and begin raising them. I decided that since I had a kennel at my old house, that I would go pick that up and set it up around my coop for the chickens to have some free roaming space. The kennel had 4 fence pieces that I could move on my own, but they were heavy, so I backed my truck up to my fence where the kennel was going to go, and I start heaving them over. Scumbag Steve sees me doing this and he offers to lend a hand, so I said, sure, why not? This is when he asks why I need a dog kennel if I have a fence, to which I inform him it's not for my dogs and for the chickens. Now, I should have known that he was going to cause issues from here because the next thing he says is, your HOA allows chickens? It was phrased that way because he had lived there when the first developer of the neighborhood owned it, but they went bankrupt and my developer took over. It's the same HOA, but we didn't know that at the time. Anyways, I told him that I didn't see anything in the paperwork provided to me regarding chickens, and that was that, until the next day. Scumbag Steve comes over with a loaf of bread from his mom's bakery that he occasionally helps at. He's making small talk when he brings up the chickens again. This time, he's only talking to my wife about it, but he again brings up that the HOA doesn't allow chickens, and he was bummed about that. And that's where the story should have ended. Maybe about a week or so later, I got a letter from the HOA. The letter says, it's come to our attention that you have chickens on your property. Per bylaw X, that's not allowed. You have 30 days to remove said chickens from your property. Now, I was perplexed because how on earth did they find out about them? And why was I not provided with a copy of the HOA bylaws when I signed the contract for my house? The day after receiving the letter, my wife and I are on our way home from some errands when another neighbor that we're friendly with flags us down. He says to us, I don't know if you know, but Scumbag Steve went up to your fence and he was taking pictures of your backyard. And for context, there was an empty lot between Scumbag Steve's house and ours. But that finally clicked for us. Scumbag Steve reported us to the HOA. So me being me, I'm not gonna take this sitting down. I'm gonna fight this. Through a bunch of back and forth with the HOA, I get a copy of the bylaws and I start picking through them with a fine-tooth comb. I found out that someone had sent 7 pages worth of pictures of all the infractions of the HOA rules, including the picture of my coop. I should also mention that I was in hot water with the HOA when I had our fence installed because it wasn't a split rail fence with chicken wire, so it didn't match the aesthetic the developer wanted for the neighborhood. They never said another thing about it though, and I end up being the catalyst for everyone else doing whatever they wanted with the fences. Also, since I'm being petty, literally any fence that's white vinyl is technically against the HOA bylaws. As it states, they can only be split rail, a maximum of 5 feet, and made of wood. But here's finally where the petty revenge comes in. You see, Scumbag Steve's got an area of his backyard that's blocked off by some wood privacy fencing that's not split rail, and it's much taller than the 5-foot maximum. Oh, and there's some unsightly plant growth that's outside of the HOA guidelines regarding the plants you can have on your property. So with that, I think it's high time the HOA hears about those gross infractions of their bylaws, seeing as how we're all trying to do the right thing and follow the rules. So I snap a couple of pictures of the privacy fence, the eyesore plants, and the static line he has for his dog in the front yard. I felt a little bad for the dog initially, but he would leave her out for hours and she'd run into the street at cars driving by, since the static line was long enough for her to get her whole body past the curb. I can't tell you how many almost heart attacks I had because I thought I was about to run over a dog, but I can tell you that probably a week or so later, Scumbag Steve gets his nastygram from the HOA, informing him that he needs to remove the static line and remove the privacy fence. I know that because I watched with absolute glee as he spent all day removing his privacy fence. Listen, can't say Scumbag Steve didn't deserve that, right? Like, he could have just left OP alone, but no, let's just start a war with my neighbor. Hopefully Scumbag Steve learned a lesson to mind his own business while taking down his privacy fence. And this next Karen neighbor's pettiness also backfires big time. We bought our house 4 years ago. During the showing, inspections, appraisal, and approval by the city, nobody said anything about the neighbor's fence that spanned from the front right corner of his house across his driveway to the front left corner of my house. This effectively blocked me from accessing a 30-foot by 4-foot strip of my own property. It was all grass that he mowed. Later that year in November, I noticed a tiny bit of water seeping into the basement on that side of the house. We had just gotten through our third historic, once-in-a-100-years rainfall of the year. A quick look of that side of the house shows a slight slope towards my house, so I plan to hire somebody in the spring to slope it away and install a French drain so I didn't flood his driveway like a good neighbor. The next spring, I hire a crew. They went over and they started working. The neighbor, a 60-year-old who looks 80 according to my wife, comes out all hot, screaming at these guys, wondering what they were doing on his property. Mind you, I never had issues with a siding repair who accessed that same side, or the cable guy, or a plumber who all accessed that side many times before. He gave him a hard time for a few minutes, and they blew it off, and they thought he had been day drinking. They sloped, tilled, mulched, and they left a nice flower bed for future use. The next year, I plant some roses in the bed, and I hired a company to do a whole yard clean. They got to that side to pull the weeds and lay fresh mulch, and the old man comes out screaming, telling them to get off his property. The old man even attempted to punch one of the guys, calling them all stupid Mexicans. And the thing is, these guys were white, so that made no sense. I come out and he starts yelling at me, saying that they're messing up his yard and he wanted me to pay to resod. I said, no way. Well, the guy starts calling me a bitch over and over again. I told them to ignore that side. I spoke with my wife and we both agreed that if he wants to be a D-bag, we'll just be petty and we'll let it all overgrow so he can look at it. You can't really see it from the street, so I didn't care. The weeds were 4 foot tall by the end of summer. The spring was also wet, so the weeds were knee-high by the start of May. I was outside mowing when he came over the fence, got into my face, and he screams, "When the F are you gonna clean this crap up?" To which I said to him, when I have assurances that you won't harass me or the workers, then I'll clean it up. And this upset him. He starts calling me a bitch over and over again. He even throws the word lazy out for good measure. So I said, call the city, and ignored him. He then turns his attention to the other neighbors and he starts raising holy hell with them. My house, while older, is well maintained and carefully landscaped. His house has aluminum siding from the 80s. He doesn't edge any of the sidewalks or driveway, and he has old aluminum awnings that are filthy. His back patio has tall weeds between the pavers. I say nothing about that. It's not mine, and honestly, he's keeping values down enough that the tax man didn't raise my rates, so I just don't care. The next day, code enforcement knocks on my door. He called them on us. The guy said, "I'm not sure why I'm here. I see no weeds and you have a nice home. Can you show me where he thinks these weeds are? So we went to the side of the house, and code enforcement sees his fence blocking my access. He says, well, there's nothing I can do to you, but he has 10 days to remove that fence. He also needs to weed his patio and edge the sidewalk. The next morning, his wife comes over, and she asked if I would split the cost of removing the fence. So I said to her, I'm sorry, but us bitches are out of charity money this week. It's all on your husband. He did this. And let me tell you, there was so much joy watching that nasty old man sweating in the heat, removing that fence, all because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He could have at least tolerated someone in his grass to make it look nicer, but no. When I finally got access, I removed those roses and I put them somewhere I can enjoy them. The mulch was removed and I laid down some landscaping plastic and I covered the whole thing in pea gravel. If you want to be a D-bag, fine. Look at the crappy side of my house. So I went to visit my mom yesterday and she told me this story. I'll also admit that this makes my mom look like an a-hole, but it is petty revenge. So that said, my brother, who's 9 years old, likes to play with the other boys on the block. They usually play soccer or bike races outside, and this is during afternoons and evenings when they're done with homework. They can be pretty loud because their age is 8 to 12. The neighborhood my mom lives in has something similar to an HOA. They have a representative and they have to pay fees, mostly for security and surveillance, even though it's very safe. And the rep is friends with my grandma, who also lives there. So on a Thursday, the rep calls my mom to tell her that somebody complained that the kids were being too loud, and it was too late for them to be alone outside. Now, mind you, it's like 7:30 at night. They don't have school the next day, and the street's pretty illuminated and has cameras basically on every light post. So my mom calmly tells the rep to ask the person complaining to call her directly, because she's actually outside speaking with the other kids' parents as they were watching them. And this is a family-friendly neighborhood. The rep starts getting defensive and said she doesn't want to cause conflict. She starts making up excuses, and that was that. Later on, the rep was chit-chatting with my grandma, and she said that her nephew was having trouble with his work because there's too much noise outside. So Mom knew that he was the one complaining. And the thing is, he's basically fresh out of college, which means that he hosts parties from Thursday to Saturday, or just blasts his stereo while drinking until 4 or 5 in the morning. Kinda hypocritical if you ask me. So cue my mom asking the boys to play right in front of his house and yell as loud as they can. My brother's curfew's normally 8 p.m, so he can get a good night's sleep. But my mom and the other kids' parents extended it to 10 p.m. because they don't have school the next day. The dude never complained again, but my mom did report him every time he has his speaker on after midnight. He eventually stopped, except for a party here and there, and all was well. The end. Listen guys, I know this is not an Am I the A-hole post, but a lot of people are arguing that OP's mother's the bad guy in this situation. In my opinion, I don't think she's the bad guy at all because, like OP said, how dare the guy complain when he's having parties multiple times a week and playing loud music throughout the night? It's about time he got a taste of his own medicine, if you ask me. And this last OP destroys an HOA over a fake fine. Listen to this one. So I bought my home in 2001 in a 42-home community. We picked the community because the HOA fees were very low, at just $51. It wasn't long after we bought the last home in the community before those dues started going up. I was 22 at the time. Looking into the financial reports and into the meetings, it became very clear why the dues were going up. The board was set up by the developers of the homes. Our management company was a sub-corporation of the home builder, and the board members were a combination of one of the home developers and two of the very first home purchasers in the community, a 3-person board. The first action the board took with that increase in funds was to remove the trees that weren't even on the HOA's property. They were just trees that sat in an area the HOA had access to for weed abatement. Now, these trees' real crime was not that they were weeds. It was because they blocked the nice view of the board's president and vice president. At the same time, the BS violation letters start going out to about half the homes that you aren't mowing enough. You aren't watering enough. Every petty thing you can think of, they were issuing warning letters and they were fining the homeowners. Cue revenge time after getting one of those letters myself about weed abatement. Ironically, it was researching the community's conditions and restrictions about weed abatement that led me to realize that the trees cut were not on HOA property. It was also researching the annual budget that led me to finding out that the huge weed abatement expense was actually the community's funds being spent to remove the trees solely for the two board members' views. I then found out that in California, all anybody needs to initiate a recall of the entire board was the signatures of 5% of homeowners delivered to the current board. That's a total of 3 houses in a 42-home community. The board was issued a recall notice not 48 hours after I found out about the law. This is also when I found out that the management company basically had the entire board in its pocket because they dragged their feet with the recall vote. They set it as far out as they could by law in the middle of the day. Instead of holding it in the community like all board meetings, they set the place at a local park a couple of miles away. They thought they were so brilliant doing this. So me and my wife put together a proxy voting form for the election, and we went to every door in the community. We told them what was happening with their money and their plans to create an architecture committee that would require all homeowners to get approvals for any additions or changes, everything. It took us 3 rounds in the neighborhood, plus a couple of extra visits to homes that had not answered initially. In the end, me and my wife had 26 revocable proxies for the election. For those unfamiliar with proxies, it basically gave me and my wife the power to cast the homeowner's vote for them, if and only if they didn't show up to the election. The thoughtless board and management company actually made it easier for us to collect the proxies because a lot of homeowners flat out couldn't make the time and place of the meeting. The recall day finally arrives. The current board members are all there. The management company representative is there, and 8 other homeowners showed up to the meeting, 6 of whom we had proxies for, and which were revoked by their attendance. They open the meeting and they start saying something about, "Oh, it looks like a waste of money. There isn't enough of you here for our committee to legally conduct business and make valid votes, blah blah blah." That's when I said, "I'm sorry, but we do have enough." They're like, no, you need 22 homeowners here and there's only 12. And that's when I pull out the trump card. I dropped all 26 proxies on the bench table that everyone's sitting at. And I said, "I'm sorry, but there are more than 30 homeowners present." I then pointed out the math, and after subtracting the 6 homeowners that showed up, we had 20 additional proxy votes that counted for both quorum and voting purposes. They all got wide-eyed, especially the management company representative. He came over and he looked at all the forms very closely and compared it against the list of the homeowners. Even the people that were there and on our side didn't realize how much work we had done to ensure the BS ends right then and there. The recall meeting was opened and the board members voted not to recall, plus their 3 friends that were on their side. The other homeowners present voted to recall, and the vote stood at 6-6. Tied. This is when I stood and I declared that we were voting our 20 valid proxy votes to recall the entire board. The recall passed, 26 votes to 6. The next vote, who replaces the board members. It ends up becoming me and my wife and another homeowner that voted for recall and was willing to take the seat. We elected ourselves to the board seats by a vote of 26-6. It was at this point that the management company then states that Canon Management was immediately resigning as the management company for the community. I then pull out the HOA's management contract, which clearly states that either side needs to give 3 months' notice to effect resignation, and stated that we, the new board, accepted their resignation, and we set an end date for their services 3 months later. The management guy was nuclear pissed off. I had beaten them at their own game, and I prepared for their possible quitting shenanigan. We replaced the management company after a couple of months, having had proper time to find and vet an independent company at about half the cost, no less. We did the same with the gardening services, which was also a home builder affiliated company, also about half the cost. The old president of the HOA was so mad at us that he put up his home for sale about a month later, after we rescinded all the old violations and we issued a notice to the old board members that we intended to vote on whether they had committed fraud against the association over their weed abatement tree removal action. I still remember walking over to the old president's house the day he was moving, and I gave him a big wave goodbye as he was getting into the car to follow his moving truck. He gave me the finger as he drove out, and that's definitely one of my proudest moments in life. And a well-deserved moment at that. Like, Opie is such a hero for getting rid of those corrupt HOA members before it got really bad. Like, if they issued those violations to get money to improve their view, you really have to wonder what else they'd do as they realized people are giving them money. Again, props to OP for going through all of that for the community. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/PettyRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode. So go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.